And he said, yes. And I said, are you a Christian or a Jew? And he said, I said, me too, Protestant or Catholic? And he said, Protestant. And I said, me too. What franchise? And he said, Baptist. And I said, me too. Northern or Southern Baptist? And he said, Northern Baptist. And I said, me too. Northern Conservative Baptist or Northern Liberal Baptist? And he said, Northern Conservative Baptist. And I said, me too. Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes region or Northern Conservative Baptist Eastern region? And he said, Northern Baptist Conservative Great Lakes region. And I said, me too. Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes Region Council of 1879 or Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes Region Council of 1912. And he said, Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes Region Council of 1912. And I said, die, heretic! And I pushed him off the bridge. That about sums up how I feel about doctrine. It's mostly harmful, always divisive. But that said, I want to share something else with you, not quite nearly as famous, but you've heard this before. I found a poem that I wrote 15 years ago. Wow, that was only 3 years into the conflict. And I did it in the style of one of Baltimore's favorite sons, Ogden Nash. And I titled it, A Heresy in Rhyme, since it turns out to be much more ingestible that way and it takes less time. So if you'll pardon me for just a couple of minutes, I'll share this with you and then we'll move on. But the poet wrote, on Christmas Eve, we speak of birth and shepherds sherding sheep, angels wing o'er the earth and not quite so much round as say perhaps on the young side virgins keep. Epiphany begs us not forget those first days by the sea and fishermen with teeming nets and others who were dreamier perhaps and somewhat less sheeptical, sitting beneath a tree. Lent leads us to the wilderness and days of preparation for a time of pain and grave distress and what will prove by any standards horrid degradation. Palm Sunday puts us in the crowd that hails God's revolution, though Friday fills us shrill and proud with shouts for execution. On Easter Day, we celebrate life death cannot contain and set our minds to contemplate the yin and yang of what could be love's never-ending reign on Pentecost. With tongues of fire, our hearts are set to burn, our thoughts and actions to inspire, a world to overturn. But something different on this day. I find it rather odd. We celebrate a peculiar way that we try to unravel God. And we go without net, no feeling, healing, no parabolic story, no clever teaching peeling off some vital hidden glory. Today, we toast the souls who dared define divinity, who dreamed upon some nature shared and pronounced it Trinity. Now, it did not streak out of the blue, this no instant holy notion. It took a century or three of dogmatical devotion. It puzzled them just how it was, with all that had been seen and done, that God could do the things God does, inspire the whiz that always was, and just be only one. But God was one, they knew for sure, always would and would always be. The other tribes had gods galore. But whence the number 3? Well, simply put, though they agreed God really worked alone, Through faith, their mind's eye had been freed, and they were new reality, did some inspiration show. They said, God is creator, and that's a basic fact, but the work is so much greater, there is much more to his act. For those of you keeping score, this is where the heresy starts. For the earth was not just left to spin, forsaken and abandoned. The prophets came and clued us in. God still had her hand in. The stuff of life, after all, is not far away. No reason to doubt or fear it. The force that spilled the Milky Way surrounds us with its spirit. That force that commands the cosmic winds and sets the sun to blaze resides within our hearts and can be known to us both ways. But more than that, this Jesus guy, there's something up with him. Unlike any other that saw the sky or judged true beauty with his eye, God filled him to the brim. The things he taught before he died with such a God-filled heart that if you place them side by side, you'd scarce tell them apart. In other words, they felt it plain, if God played mom or daddy, to one God's Spirit would remain with, then Jesus was that laddie. And so though God was a solo act and really was just one, these folks of love and faithful merit could see God in Maker and in Son and could revel in God's Spirit. They did their best to help us see, though God's a single entity, how it's possible to know as three this loner who is Trinity. Still confused? And you will have to wait for someone else to make it plainer. How the God who all things did create is Redeemer and Sustainer. And now, although this verse should end my message for the morning, I feel I am compelled, my friends, to share with you this morning. For couched within the revelry of a doctrine that we praise is pattern for some devilry that can spoil the hopes we raise. A cautionary tale, it's true, of doctrine's darker side, of a power that we all imbue to commit some churchicide. This peril we should take to heart, this thought that ought to perish, for community can be torn apart when tradition's what we cherish. Above all else, we risk that minds will freeze, hearts bound with chains and locks, when we dare the Spirit to make a move and ease and shove God in a box. When we punish every new idea and disallow debate, when we let our souls be governed by fear, we court that bitter fate. When worship is worship of things we've done and the ways of things we do's, then we mute God's love mandate from one, and it's all of us that lose. For though candy's dandy, unity's done if one side wins the day, and the heart of God is quickerly grieved to see us act to honor those who went before and the faith they did impart, we have to open every door in the church and in our heart. For the mark of the church in every age, a simple heartfelt token. No matter what pride's voice might rage, within here, love is spoken. To succeed in love is to be blessed to the power of infinity and gives us share with those who rest within the mystical Trinity. So, here's what I really want to say in my last attempt to make sense of the mystery of the Trinity. And that is simply this, that you cannot. There's a famous scene at the end of the movie, Ridley Scott's Kingdom of Heaven. Balian is about to surrender the city of Jerusalem to the Muslim leader, Salah ad-Din. And Salah ad-Din has just guaranteed him the safe passage of all inhabitants in the city, men, women, children, back to Christian lands. And Balian notes that when the Christians took the city years earlier, they had slaughtered everyone inside the walls, Jew and Muslim alike. And as they part, Balian asks, what is Jerusalem worth? Saladin turns to him and says, "Nothing." He walks a few more paces, turns again, and says, "Everything." And that is the Trinity. It is nothing, it is everything. It is nothing because it began life as a litmus test. It birthed the creeds which gave the doctrine its own language, and through that language, power. And it was weaponized. It demanded allegiance to a particular way of thinking about God, and people died when they did not affirm what this doctrine said, and precisely as it was put forth by those who got to decide who was the heretic and who was the hero. It is nothing, if for no other reason than that in the pursuit of this doctrinal truth and purity, through it we have crafted God into the divinity that we want. And then, ironically, we waste our time explaining that God, defending that God, even protecting that God at times, which is kind of weird when you think about it, as if God needed protecting from anything except perhaps our own limited imaginations and capacity to love. It is nothing in that it can become the highest form of our religious arrogance. In spite of the many talking heads who will say many clever things this day that do actually help to restore some of the mystery and the knowing, in most cases, they're actually just trying to prop up this doctrinal tool that I believe has outlived both its original purpose and the theology that it spawned. Which is probably why I find Unitarians and Muslims, who were the original Unitarians, quite refreshing. And yet the Trinity is everything, everything. And couched within it is this wonderful, beautiful truth, and it is wonderful. It is that for all of our precise language and theologizing, for all the time we waste explaining God, the beautiful truth is that we all get God wrong. Every last one of us. Even me, if you believe that. And the Trinity means nothing more than this too. That in the sense of everything. And the simple meaning of the Trinity is this, that God simply refuses not to be found everywhere. The expressions of God are limitless, are boundless. And to reduce God to the Trinity is far too limiting, and as we know from our history, far too self-serving. And the heretic that stands before you believes that we finally need to take the training wheels off of a faith which clings to this ancient anthropomorphic understanding of God as quickly as we can, so that we can begin to taste and see and touch and experience a much fuller God than perhaps we have ever known, though I dare say you have encountered that God. Let me close by giving you an update on an old protege of mine who I still talk to quite regularly. Some of you know, a young man by the name of Stephen Wallace. And Stephen was our guest, actually. He was homeless in Calvert County. And there were many a night that he slept somewhere in one of these box pews. But he's now living in Western Massachusetts, just outside of the best small town in America, Northampton. And he called me earlier this week to tell me very excited about the divine intervention that he'd experienced. He had been working hard to, and this is to motivate himself actually, to get health care. Massachusetts has a great plan. And to get himself re-enrolled in college. He has this idea of finishing his bachelor's and moving on to a master's and perhaps a doctorate in teaching. But he was having a frustrated week, and he was thinking, well, I'm going to pitch this for a while and just go back to writing or doing music and performing. Although, as some of us know too, Deb's laughing because Stephen used to gather with us at the Turnabout and would start singing on Friday nights during our coffee house type thing. And he was known for never finishing a song. He'd get halfway through and then just stop and go on to the next one. And he was in that same sort of mode here. But he said he was going into work. He was taking public transportation. And there on the corner, by chance, was one of those street corner prophets, the soapbox guys. And this This gentleman, an older, black man, and I don't know if certifiably this or that or the other, but he's rambling on about racism and about capitalism and about all of those things you would expect someone to ramble about in Western Massachusetts. And Stephen asked him a question, and they fell into this conversation. And Stephen heard his life story, and through that somehow found the inspiration and is determined now to complete this course of action. And he called me to say that because of this man, he now had his health insurance through the state of Massachusetts and was already in contact with the registrar and was smoothing things out so that he could begin classes in the fall. It was great. But he pointed out again that he had experienced the divine in this encounter. He felt that God was speaking to him through this indigent prophet. And I mentioned to him how on occasion I would stop our Eucharistic prayer when we got to that part about Christ coming again. And on those occasions, I would stop and say to everyone gathered, if you're expecting the clouds to suddenly open someday and for Jesus to descend in glory, you're in for a shock, because it's not going to happen. Because Christ returns every day, thousands of times. You just have to keep your ears and eyes and hearts and minds open, and you will see him or her when he appears that way, and hear him, speaking in many voices, doing many things, and each will be an expression of the divine. For those of us who came to the early service, one of the best examples I can tell you about Christ coming, and Christ came every Sunday for the Eucharist. It was when William walked in that back door and took a seat. That was God. Because God absolutely refuses to not be everywhere and in everyone. So happy Trinity Sunday, everyone. And remember to keep those eyes open. Amen.